Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the President of the Stop the War Coalition, Mr. Tony Benn.
Right. Well, the title of this meeting must excite everybody: dangerous ideas for dangerous times. Because can anybody doubt for a moment we live in very, very dangerous times? If you take the domestic situation, mass unemployment, which leads inevitably to violence and injustice that leads to conflict. You've got a world at war. There's a war every day, and then the arms manufacturers offer to supply weapons to meet the demand for killing people, and governments offer to send troops and lift embargoes and so on. And so wherever you look, you find these horrific problems, and we are here to look at sensible arguments which will meet these problems without going along the same route of violence and war. That's what we're about. And if you look back on history, there's a great to be said for that, because you realize that how many of the great advances that have been made by people just like ourselves, who at certain periods have said we're not prepared to accept slavery. And you can imagine what a lot of trouble that caused. People who were opposed to slavery were for undermining the whole nature of the economy, the whole way in which society worked, and yet they went on and on and on, and in the end slavery was abolished. Or if you take another example, which has never been resolved, but is a dominant one, the land. In the old days, the common land, there were people who farmed the common land, and then the people at the top realized that if you sold off the common land into big farms, you could make a lot of people very rich, and that would strengthen the economy, they argued. And you could imagine their arguments in Parliament, that if you do that, you'll be able to find more efficient farming methods, and all it did was to build up huge landowning class of people who still dominate the world. I mean, the richest man in Britain is a member of the royal family who owns property in Whitehall, in that area. Why? Because if you own it there, you own the most valuable land in the world, and if you want to rent an office or get a home there, you have to pay through the nose for it, and anyone who challenged that would be described as a wrecker, and yet we know that the private ownership of land is at the source of a lot of our problems. Then if you go forward to trade unionism, I mean, when trade unions began, they were completely illegal. And we celebrate every year, we go down to demonstrate in support of the people who founded the trade unions. They were sent, original trade unionists were sent as prisoners to Australia, as slaves to Australia in effect, to work in the factories there, because they would not accept that trade unions were illegal. And there was such a row about it. So many dangerous people like us got together and protested that in the end trade unions became legal. It's the same with another example which has been in the news recently, and that is the rights of women, because of course to begin with, women were regarded as slaves, and anyone who challenged the exclusion of women from the political process were trying to wreck society, destabilize everything, and right up until, 1928 was the first year that women had the vote. I was 3 at the time, and when I was born, women didn't have the vote. And that was put right by determined people, mainly women, of course, who got together and campaigned and campaigned and campaigned, and ultimately they won. And the lesson I draw from all that is that if those great gains could be made by people like ourselves campaigning, we can campaign today for the things we want. And what we want is we want civil peace, we want homes for everybody and jobs for everybody, national health provision, I tell you something else we need, and that is a national care service to look after older people who need care as they get older and become more infirm. And these are things we have to campaign for with the same passion and energy that was demonstrated by our predecessors. We want to campaign against nuclear weapons because they are deadly dangerous. And yet you know quite well that although some political leaders will warn about nuclear weapons, when it comes to the manifesto, no political party is prepared so far to come out against them. And yet with the spread of nuclear weapons, you've got North Korea, you've got Israel, you've got more and more countries developing these weapons, and the potential for a conflict that would really be the end of civilization has to be confronted and faced. And how do you deal with that? Because war does perform some very useful functions. I mean, weak political leaders who go to war can be made to look quite strong. I mean, I give you an example. Mrs. Thatcher was the most unpopular Prime Minister we'd ever had until the Falklands War. And then when she rallied people to fight against the Argentine, her popularity rose to enormous heights. And of course, the arms manufacturers made a lot of money out of it, and they supported it. And gradually you saw war taking over, and a bloody conflict it was, and the problem is not yet solved. So all this meeting tonight is about is just to encourage us to believe anything is possible, provided we're prepared to make the effort, prepared to take the flak of being opposed to the conventional wisdom. And when the media turn on you, I tell you from experience, it's a very unpleasant thing to happen, but you have to go through that if you're going to build up the public opinion we need to change things. So thanks for coming. We're all part of a very dangerous movement, and for that reason we've got the best hope of making things better.